Welcome, everyone. I am Kathleen McMahon.
Yay.
Yeah! And I am so excited to be here today in Warsaw to talk to you today about a design system carnival. One accessible component, many pretty masks, even that one sad mask. Before we begin, let's get some details out of the way. We will turn on my clicker, and my presentation will be available on Notice. That's https://noti.st/resource11. I will post the full URL on Twitter sometime after my presentation. You can also follow me at Resource11 on Twitter, Instagram, and GitHub. Back up so I can introduce myself a little bit better. I am an engineer, a designer, and I'm a speaker, occasional cyclocross racer. Yes, I wear costumes. Backwards, very slowly, where people laugh at me, drinking beers, toasting. And I love lights, going to the beach, and collecting sand dollars, because it's the Where's Waldo of the ocean. I love my cats, Thor and Otis, collect a ridiculous amount of crystals, and I try to photograph them, but my cats interfere often with their opinions about where I should place my attentions. And Otis has done that, and Thor has learned to do the same. But who can resist them? And this is how I shake off my neurospicy ways, so I appreciate your patience. I have worked on a few design systems in the past. It's been O'Reilly Media, LaunchDarkly, and Northwestern Mutual. And I think design systems are always the hotness. It's very exciting work, especially if you like herding kittens. It's always fun with a lot of moving parts. And I think design systems are like a carnival. And what do I mean by that? Well, when I visited Venice a couple years ago, I was fascinated by the masks. I loved their beauty and their variety. And they are everywhere you go, everywhere you look, in the shops. And you see them on the streets, in the souvenirs, and I even learned how to make my own mask. And I also learned that the masks have a rich history of providing access and helping a person blend in to hide their gender, their identity, and their social class. Some of the well-known masks are the Bauta, the Moretta, and the Gagna, and the Harlequin. And wearing these masks gave you access to places with more freedom, like this place, the gondolas during Venice's Carnival. Similar to a design system, well-crafted, masks create a consistency of experiences. So is this experience consistent for everyone, though? Let's talk accessibility. Our users have different needs at different times, from vision, hearing, motor skills, cognitive needs, sensory needs, language needs, bandwidth needs, and more. Our users have all these needs, and so often accessibility is often what is handled last, and we don't want to leave our users behind. So what does that mean in terms of accessible design components? Well, there is this Web Million report where in February 2003, and actually 2004 just came out, there is an analysis of the top 1 million home pages where they do a scan of the most common errors, and the results are concerning. And I just did a detail of something that just came out last week. There has been an 11.8 increase in added unnecessary ARIA attributes on the 1 million home pages in the last year alone. That is still a quadruple increase since 2019. And there are 34.2% more detected errors on home pages with ARIA present than those without. So that means while our developers want to do the right thing, they're making the web worse in the spirit of good intentions. So what can we do about this? Well, there is this whole site called the ARIA Authoring Practices Guide, the APG, and it's giving us all these guidelines to follow with design patterns and examples. And one of those examples is called the disclosure widget. If a disclosure widget is built properly, it can have many uses in your design system. This is a common pattern that we've built so often in our design system. This pattern has been built for so long. We've used this one pattern for many uses. We've made this pattern for things like pop-ups, toggle tips, and toggle searches. And I've talked about this many times. I've made many deep dives on this topic, on just the small units of how to add every single attribute to a component, how to build it. This is not that type of talk. And I'm going to go a little bit faster. And if you want those type of talks, I can share code examples for you. However, I'm going to give you a quick anatomy of how we have in the past built a disclosure widget. And what that is, that pattern has been, is a button that opens and closes a container and returns focus to the button. And that APG, or the WAI site, has a documented pattern for that, the disclosure show and hide pattern. And it's the basic disclosure widget. And it has 3 primary keyboard interactions. It has to support spacebar, enter key presses, escape key presses, and mouse clicks. And for an extended pattern, an escape key press to return focus to the button when the disclosure widget is closed. And when you build this in React or JSX, you use a JSX button, because under the hood, when that code's rendered, you render a button. And when you use a button, thanks to the browser vendors and with HTML, button under the hood gives you mouse clicks, enter key press support, spacebar key press support. Hello, hooray, awesome. And when you have that as your basis, you add only the ARIA support that you need, because the best amount of ARIA to add is no ARIA at all, unless you must, unless you really know what you're doing. Otherwise, you're making things worse, as you saw from that report. So we're going to add just enough ARIA attributes to let the screen readers know what we know, right? So what we have done in the past is we've been adding things like ARIA controls, ARIA expanded to make sure the button knows how to open and close the widget. We do labeling if we need to have like any expanded labeling functionality for when we have many buttons on the page. We've been doing in React state and click management. We've been doing all these other, use state hooks in React and sending up, these props to make sure we're handling whether this widget is open by default, and sending up functions whether this widget is, whether we can toggle it open or not, and passing in this prop into on-click handlers, and then passing it into our ARIA expanded props, and then passing in that is open prop into, our div, and only rendering the children if is open is true. So we're adding all this complexity into our disclosure widget for the sense of making sure it's nice, accessible, and doing the right thing. And then we're adding our focus management making sure we are adding our refs so we can talk. So making sure that we can listen for escape key presses and the key code of 27. So when we close the button on the key up press of the whole wrapper container of the button and div pairing, the focus will return to the button when you close the widget. So we're doing all this work. And then we're doing some really nice normalization of our focus states in this disclosure widget design system component, which is important because you don't want to hide your states. So this is a nice pattern that we do, setting the outline to 0. And if you're setting your outline to 0, which is usually a bad practice, you're always making sure you're replacing it with some nice normalized style where you can like do a variable and add some box shadow, and then you can customize as you need to customize. But this is a way to, if you're gonna have focus styles, make sure you have something consistent throughout your buttons. And then pick and choose where you want to make something nuanced. But you should not remove your focus styles because people rely on them. People with low vision especially rely on focus styles because they need to know where they are on the page. So going forth with this, you're doing all these things like mouse click management, making sure if you click away, you only have one of your widgets open on the page. This is called like light dismiss. We're doing all these complexities, making sure we're having these handlers in your use effect hook of adding a handler of like mouse up and key up of, is everything handled? Do we have these clicks? Is everything done? Cool, so complex. And now we have this pattern and we're adding it to, now we have like tool tips and toggle tips. By the way, a tool tip is not a toggle tip. I'm going somewhere with this, I promise. This is a little bit of storytelling. We have this pattern that we've been working on a long time. It's just gotten simpler. I've not gotten there yet, and my mouth is really dry. So we have this basic pattern, and we've moved toward building things like tooltips with this pattern, where we're going through and taking that pattern and making things like a button and a container that can hold like an icon-only button with, a paragraph with a link like this. And where you compare, button with things like pass in an icon in Font Awesome icons with our buttons and a decorative icon, and use Font Awesome icon, which is really nice, and have a really nice clean API, and it's really cool. And pass this through to our design system and have something really lean into our disclosure widget. And go forth and like, ooh, we have a nice, toggle tip. And use the same pattern for our toggle search with our disclosure widget. And pass this, with this pattern, we can pass in a form with an input and extend our widget with a first item ref to send focus to the input as a nice UX enhancement. And with this, we're starting to extend our pattern and make our pattern even greater and a little bit longer, and we're starting to get more clever. And our component is starting to just get bigger and more complex as we do this. And as developers, it's starting to become this mega component as we keep going and adding more stuff to our code with these just more lines of features and code. Because when we get to this point, we're like, okay, we have a widget. And we have this widget that opens and closes a container. And we can make a tooltip with it. And we can make a toggle search with it. And designer can hand you something like hamburger navigation. and you see it, you're like, well, this is cool. And you're like, this is a good case for extending it. And when you see this as an accessibility person, you're like, well, form should also follow a function. You're going to look at this and you're going to say, if those are links, they should actually look like links and not buttons. So you're going to redesign them, and then you're going to build everything in your widget. And you're going to see your widget, and you're like, okay, I've have my widget, and now I'm filling things in my widget because I have my basic pattern of my widget. Either someone's snoring or someone like, oh, or someone 20 floors down is having construction. I thought for a second. But in here, like when you have here, when you had the pattern here, thanks ADHD. When we have this hamburger navigation, you could look at it and go, okay, I have this pattern, and I will add an unordered list of links, because we have the semantics of unordered list. We're going to pass in, list item and pass in some links. We're like, oh, cool, this is a really nice pattern that I can use in my widget. Then we're like, oh, wait, this is really cool. Then I can make inside here, a component for like a list item. This is kind of nice. But that's really nice. But if we have that, why don't I add buttons in there too? Because it's kind of a pattern. Sometimes you see links. Why don't I add buttons there? Why not? Sometimes I use that for buttons. That could work. Sure. We'll make a toggle menu buttons too. We're already here. Click, click. But then while you're there, hey, cool, while I'm there, I could add some up-down arrow functions, some roving focus, escape, and end functionality, which is nice. Well, you've seen those menus. That could work. So we add the up and down arrow key support. So we're starting, to get a little more clever. And then we're like, all right, that's really nice. But we can make this even a little more optimal. How about, rather than passing in a button or a link, let's create a tag prop, because we're really clever. Let's create a custom tag prop. And so whenever we do, we pass in a custom tag, and we can pass any tag in HTML that we want and render at our will. Tags everywhere, tags for everyone. And then pass in, roles, and do like some custom targeted focus management. And wow, look how fancy we are with our list item component now. Woo, custom tag component. We now have fancy lists, separation concerns, baby. But that could be kind of problematic accessibility-wise, but hey, no problem. It's just a thing. It's really functional, and it's like a factory. No big deal. But then you could have like some ternary magic in there, like decide you could have you render a div, you could render a UL, you could render a list. But if you start looking at this kind of stuff, if you look on the right, by the way, that's the component, the entire component, you have this ternary of like passing things in. It's kind of big, and maybe it's not exactly a good idea to like shove all that in one component. Like, maybe not. So, because what pattern have we gone from? Because we started a disclosure widget, we just went right to a menu and menu bar component in that APG site. Completely different ARIA roles and states. So anyone who's accessing this in a screen reader is confused. Like, what are you serving me up right now? I don't know where I am. Help me. Because that's why this site is there. It's helping you learn about roles, states, and properties. So you can add all these HTML, you have these HTML semantic elements to add. But if you start playing with ARIA if you're not using the proper roles groups in states and properties. That's where you start wading into this dangerous territory. That is why the HTML elements with semantics have those roles, states, and properties built in under the hood. And the ARIA roles that are added are built and made for a reason where the semantic elements haven't, these are like the special needs for where a semantic element hasn't provided for them yet. And what we were looking at were like all these different examples for like these, we went from like these mega menus to like menu buttons and all these, we went from like menu buttons and disclosure and show and hide. It's like, whoa, Nelly, that's just really ridiculous. So it's, it just became me making unwise decisions and creating dishes like shallow and shellfish, and things can go wrong very quickly. And you just don't want to do that. So you just really do not want to be mixing your maths and breaking the rules of ARIA. You really should be separating your components with your purposeful intent, or things can just go very, very wrong. Like, you could have oh God, there's a T-Rex too. Here comes the T-Rex. This is how things can go wrong. You get chaos in your design system. But I have to say, I'm happy to say, thanks to a lot of people at the Open UI who do a lot of hard work, a solution is here. The Open UI has worked on, it used to be a component, and now it is an actual attribute in HTML. It is the popover attribute. And it is, I'm going to demo it. It is stable in all browsers, except for Firefox Nightly, but it will be stable in Firefox as of April 16th. It will. You'll get over it. But what's awesome about this is less JavaScript, less ARIA. So I'm going to show you, I'm going to do a quick demo. I'm going to do it right here. It's going to be really, let me just exit out of this and put the screen really quick over there for you. And I'm going to rubberneck over there. All right, so I just want to show you. This is literally the code. This is the code for disclosure widget. I don't need to rename it. I just want to look at it. Okay, so you have like all your props, your state, your effects, your toggles, your handlers, blah, 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 right? And it brings in the button and passes in the stuff to the button, right? And you have, your button. And your button that can take in, all your props and stuff, right? In your app, where you can implement things, this right here. Now it's not styled properly. Like right there, that's a disclosure widget. Yeah, it's jumping. Yeah, I can CSS it better. But here, popover target. Popover equals auto. That's it. Right? You know what that removes? I'm going to show you I don't know, side by side. So, popover.js is a duplicate of the disclosure widget code. Okay? I'm going to show you what I removed. Well, first I'm going to, I'm going to actually just unhide it and play it. So here is, still not styled, so I haven't done the CSSing of like where the popover is coming in yet, because they have a little bit different how they do the popover. So it comes up from the top left of the screen. But if you look here, there's no ARIA controls. There's no ARIA expanded, gone. The default expanded you'll probably need, you're gonna probably have to control the show. If you want to default, there's a show function. No state. The use effect is only for the first item ref. None of the click outside handler for the mouse management, gone. So if I looked at lines of code, if we do the whole I removed how many lines of code? Okay, so there's 132 lines of code in popover right now. $186, $50, gone immediately, gone. That's really nice, and it's just all this state so you can just work on other stuff rather than just all that escape clicks and everything else. Just for all the times you're trying, and that's just for popover. It's going to be for menu items. There's things coming for dialogue. There's things coming for modals. All the things that everyone is agonizing over, this stuff is coming. I'm so happy. Anyway, I'm going to go back and look at my timer because I didn't know where I was in time, but that's okay. We'll probably end on time or early, so that is good for everyone. All right, back to play. Who doesn't love that? So, to wrap up, design systems are a carnival, and our users have different needs. Don't mix your masks, or I will send all my costumes after you. Or you'll make bad choices and mix food like this. Or you may end up at a completely different carnival like this, which is the Via Reggio Carnival up in Italy, which is pretty awesome, actually. And get a completely different experience that you wanted. And also use a popover. And design systems are always the hotness. Thank you.